This is the Health and Politics Podcast. Prevention is the new cure.
And that's with former ministers, Steve Brine, and myself, James Bethell.
Good morning. Welcome along. This is episode 85. Thank you for finding our show. Please, if you can just take a moment to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube, we would be greatly appreciative of that. Would we not? Good morning, James.
We had a huge amount of engagement. I mean, it's really taken off on all of our channels, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and what have you. Steve, what was the thing that you think got the biggest response?
What, to Jim Mackey being on last week? Well, I think the line that I sort of put to him in a question, didn't I? So you're saying you're a disruptor. And I didn't normally, often when you give people lines in interviews, they say, well, I'll choose my own words. But actually he sort of doubled down on that, didn't he? And said, yes, actually I am a disruptor. I've always been a disruptor. And it's been quite a lot of response to that. I can't say all positive. On social media, some, dare I say, from a lot of the NHS influencers and policymakers that listen to this show, a little maybe sceptical. But they were my words, but then became his words. And so I think the disruptor line's been quite interesting to the Jim Mackey interview last week.
Yes, you pressed him on whether he was going to be around to see through the reforms. And I got to admit, I felt quite comfortable when you did that. In fact, offline, I think I accused you of being ageist.
You did. Yeah, I did press him on that.
You absolutely had a point, and that came through in the response. That there is something about him saying up front that I'm only going to be around for a year that has made people a bit skeptical that he's really going to deliver one near-term target and then skittle off back to safety in the northeast and leave others to hold the baby.
Yeah, and I think the reason why that matters, that longevity, is because secretaries of state. I mean, I'd love to think that this Secretary of State, whatever you think of him, I would like to think that he will be there for the whole Parliament, because boy, do we need that. We had like 5 health secretaries in a year or something under the last government, and we need that consistency. And if we can't have it from the Secretary of State, and let's be honest, the chances are that he will move on out at some point, then let's have it from the head of the NHS. But I don't, Jim didn't obviously say when he's going to leave. And of course, he wouldn't give us that exclusive. But I think there is a fair to middling chance that he will return to his native northeast, which he's made no secret of the fact that he wants to do.
Yeah.
How's half term going for you, James?
Do you know, I've got a heads down half term. It's a real pain. I wanted to go somewhere and have a lovely holiday, but I've got a lot on. I've been flat out. It's been pouring with rain. It's just been a total grind. How about you?
Yeah, well, you can see my my best dad mug, best dad of all time. Look, I don't know about that, but anything goes these days. Yes, well, I mean, I think I'm best dad taxi of all time. Maybe is the truth. My son has been on a school trip over the last weekend where it was sunny and warm. Love him. And since he's got back, it's just been a whirl, trips, golf, visit girlfriend, want to do this, want to do that. So the Uber, Brine Uber has been in full flow. Anyway, busy show this week. He's got a guest, which we'll come on to in a minute. So we're starting this week with Keir Starmer, who is picking a personal fight with lots of people, but he's picking a fight with big tech over children's social media. He says he'll have new age limits in months, not years. And if that means a war with Silicon Valley, then bring it on. So we'll touch on that. What else?
Well, we've got a terrific guest. We're going to also look at a couple of things. We're going to look at the new addiction fund and also some interventions on gambling. So these are proper meat and 2-veg prevention measures. We're going to look at some health tech funds. The health tech sector is in a tough place. Fundraising has been tough. The NHS doors feel very shut. So we're just going to have a quick word about whether an intervention by NICE and the NHS to put in some more money is going to make a difference. And then I'm going to talk about my dog, which is the happiest thing I can possibly do.
Yeah. And in between all of that, we're going to sit down with Sarah Woolnough from the King's Fund. She says that cancer treatment won't hit its targets without a, quote, big step change. And we want to know what that step change actually is. So we'll talk to her in a minute. So listen, just one other thing to say. Obviously, subscribe to the show, as I said. But if you want to WhatsApp us, you can now do that. Ideally, send us a voice note. We can play it in on next week's episode. The number for that is 0333 404 6507. Right, back to the top of the show, James. Starmer versus big tech. So on Saturday, Keir Starmer did something unusual. He got very personal. He wrote a Substack post called "Giving Children the Space to Grow." Said that as a dad of 2 teenagers, he knows the worries parents face. No doubt this was gridded, given half term in mind. He wants new powers to set a minimum social media age in months, not years. He's targeting the infinite scroll, the autoplay, the VPNs, the AI chatbots, and his exact words were, if that means a fight with the big social media companies, then bring it on. Now, you know a little bit about this. You've pushed for it hard in the Lords. You voted for the under 16 amendment in the face of opposition from the then government. So Starmer is on the Bethell lawn. Yes?
Yeah. Well, listen, the Substack and his words were completely hit the nail on the head. I could have written them myself, and he totally got it right. The astonishing thing, though, is it's taken us a very, very long time to get them to the table. You really get a strong sense of the bros in Downing Street, this sort of quite macho culture, leaning into tech, trying to bring tech investment to the UK, but turning its back on child safety and any consideration of regulating the tech industry. And it's been a long 18 months to try to get this to the table. Hats off to House of Lords colleagues who, as you said, brought in a vote. You know, we changed the bill despite a big fight back from the dispatch box. And we're now engaged in preemptive ping pong to try and get it nailed to the bill for good. Interestingly, Starmer himself had spoken, some of it attributed, so I hope I'm not misrepresenting his words, saying that as far as he was concerned, his kids were handling their digital experience very well, thank you very much, and he didn't see the need for intervention. And then in his Substack, he had a different line. I don't know how to interpret that, but definitely something changed in the way he was explaining his arrangements. I'm just hugely proud of this. I think it'll make a massive difference in our relationship with tech. It's the beginning of trying to put in firm guardrails. And my personal view is we need to protect the children absolutely as well as we can, because this stuff getting into their heads is having an effect on their cognitive functions, their happiness, access to predators, and their education. And for adults, we need freedom of speech and a fruity internet. And I'm more laid back about that. I don't know, Steve, how do you feel?
Let me have a go at what's changed. Look, sometimes in politics, I think you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. I think what's changed is that the Prime Minister's position is under threat. The last week was a dreadful week for the government. Continuing fallout from the Mandelson saga and the appointments that he made to the Lords. And, you know, he knows that this is popular with the public. And probably more importantly for his future, he knows that it's very popular with Labour MPs. So do I reckon this was in the grid 2 weeks ago? No, not at all. But, you know, half term coming up, it fitted with that. The thing is, James, if you peel back the detail here, the headlines were all Prime Minister to bring in social media ban for under 16s. But if you actually peel back the detail and listen to his interview, for instance, on Jeremy Vine on Radio 2 on Monday, I wonder how real this is versus an initiative that Starmer knows is popular. It has the feel to me, or certainly my fear here, is that it'll be all they've really announced is a consultation. They haven't actually said they're going to do this. So my fear is that it will be consulted on, it'll then be watered down, and it'll end up, you know, standing in the middle of the road. And as we know, if you stand in the middle of the road, you get run over. I'm not being overly cynical. Well, maybe I am cynical, but I don't think I'm being unfairly cynical in saying that, you know, isn't that the pattern of behaviour that we've seen here with this government over the last year and a half? Is that fair?
Absolutely, 100%. And that's what we're trying to do in our negotiations with the Bill team and the department, is to pin them down. They want consultations and a commitment to bring in secondary legislation. We're saying that's not good enough. They're at the end of the parliamentary session, as you know. There's a huge bottleneck on the getting bills out of Parliament. So we've got a reasonably strong negotiating position.
Yeah, I mean, I noted the line that, you know, we can go faster. It took the Tories 8 years to do the Online Safety Act, and we can do it in months, not years. all I would say to that is, look, the Online Safety Act, and I was there
Yeah.
in the Commons during that passage, and you were in the Lords. It didn't take 8 years because it was overcomplicated by the last government.
No.
That was as much down to political flux and three prime ministers in 1 year as anything else, and a constant change of leadership. You know,
Well,
I
Steve,
suspect.
I would put it
I
slightly
think
differently,
that's
actually.
probably the reality of this, isn't it?
One of the reasons why it took so long is that we tried to engage the industry and they made everything very, very complicated. And you ended up with a double-decker bill that was just so I genuinely, I admit this on this show, I can't understand the Online Safety Act. It is literally so complicated, the way the definitions work and the various layers upon layers upon layers of regulation. And I always think to myself, if I can't understand it, it's probably not a good idea. One of the nice things about this under 16 social media regulation is it's simple, right? You're under 16, platforms, you're not allowed to serve pages to people who are under 16. You know who they are. You've got all the technology in the world to be able to do that. So stop doing it, full stop. Nothing more complicated than that. And I'm pro simple regulation. I really am. So I hope it's a new generation. I hope it's a new type of legislation that doesn't require the children's code in the Online Safety Act is 1,200 pages long. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Okay.
Who can possibly run their business on the basis of a 1,200-page children's code?
Yeah, no, okay, no, that's very honest. Okay, story number two, and we're sort of running through health news of the week. Just to say, James, we're going to have some guests who are going to be joining us for Health News Wrap, and that starts next week with Charlotte Refson, who heads up
Yes.
health at the Tony Blair Institute, is going to join us to do sort of the news review. But second story that we've got today, you touched on it at the top there, £20 million abduction, 20
Yeah.
million pound addiction fund and gambling prevention fund. What's this all about?
Well, it's good news because addiction is massive, and there are technologies to help us nudge people out of addiction. And I've got a family that is absolutely rife with addiction. I've lived with it all my life. It is
Right.
really tough, and I have a lot of humanity and good feeling towards those who are struggling with addiction. So there are nudges and supports that things like AI wearables, digital tools. I'm not saying that it's a one-shot solution, but they can predict relapse and help people prevent overdosing and sometimes even death, as in the case of my mother. So I am really supportive of this. There's grants of up to £10 million each with MHRA and NICE fast-tracking successful applicants. This is exactly what that field of health tech have been looking for. So I think it's a piece of good news.
Yeah. So applications for that close on the 6th of May. And so on the 3rd of March, the Office for Health Improvement, which is sort of the successor, if you like, to Public Health England, will launch its gambling prevention programme. 15,000 people a year die from drug and alcohol addiction in England.
I know.
I mean, that's a big old number, isn't
Well,
it?
that's tip of the iceberg. There are a lot more who die of complications caused by those addictions.
Yeah. I mean, so it's big, but of course, it's a fraction of the spend that we put onto acute addiction treatment. And but I think the good thing here is that finally gambling is being seen as a public health issue.
Yes.
It's not, but in a way, it's not for me, the issue is as much as what next as the alert itself. So yes, we through tech, and we alert people to these addictions, but then it's what support services sit there next. I learned that with the smoke-free legislation that I inherited
Yeah.
as public health minister, and then the smoke-free ambition that we wrote, is that you can do these things to pull people away from cigarettes and vaping as an alternative, but unless you've got that other wraparound services there to help people actually quit permanently, then it's only half the story.
No, you put it very well. And the other thing, and listen, I'm an enthusiast for embracing technology to try and tackle knotty problems, but ultimately it's also changing the environment. With gambling, I don't mean to be a killjoy. I don't mind making a flutter every now and again, but we've got a lot of gambling going on, and they have used the algorithms and the compulsive nature of the dopamine hit around gambling to really, really power up massive growth in the gambling industry. The advertising is absolutely everywhere. It's getting into every home, every schoolyard in the country. I'm pleased that there has been a gambling levy, partly because we have to balance the books financially, partly because it hopefully is a signal to everyone and to the industry that this can't go on forever. But I do wonder whether we'll look back at this booming gambling and count the social costs with regret.
Yeah, the levy is sort of a polluter pays, isn't it? And we
Yeah,
would love to see a tobacco levy because then the polluter pays there to help with smoking cessation. But the gambling levy, yeah, interesting from this government. Just one thing on this. I just recently switched energy suppliers, so
yes,
switched
me
to
too.
Octopus Energy,
Yeah, me too.
and I've just bought an EV. And if you look on your Octopus app in the thing where you can enter your meter readings and check your account, etc., there is a sort of gambling device on there where you can spin the wheel. And if the
Really?
wheel learns on certain things, then it adds credit to your account. Now, yeah, it's kind of fun.
That's,
The kids think it's
yeah.
fun, but surely isn't that just another form of could you scroll, could you click, could you swipe to gamble?
Yes. Well, the one where I have been persuaded on, where I really wasn't there a year ago, is on EdTech, where the so-called gamification of education was heralded by a lot of people as being a new insight into trying to engage pupils. I've come around to thinking this is just addiction economy, dopamine hits, and the device manufacturers and software providers trying to engage, and partly because there's advertising around the gambling. So that kind of thing that you've just mentioned, I find it very distasteful, and I just don't want it
Yeah.
anywhere near our children. I really don't.
I was a bit surprised when I saw it, if
Yeah,
I'm
no,
honest.
that's
Anyway,
shocking. I agree.
next story, health tech funds. Over to you.
Yeah. So another sort of piece of good news for health tech industry. We've got two positive health tech stories here, and
Mm.
this will interest the sort of clinicians, I hope, who are out there on the front line trying to bring technology to bear on our health challenges. So there are three big announcements. NICE have launched the HealthTech Access Programme, and that's for the first time approving health technologies. Health technologies will get the same mandatory NHS reimbursement as drugs. And that's the parity that they've been looking for a long, long time. So the really good example of that is the capsule sponge test for esophageal cancer. I don't know if you've seen that. Instead of having a great big tube stuck down you, you could just swallow a sponge on a string.
Mm.
And it massively increases the opportunities for cheap, affordable, and less uncomfortable diagnosis. In addition, there's a £20 million addiction fund, which we just mentioned. And then there's the NHS Innovation Accelerator announcing its 2026 intake on Sunday. So that's good news. The bad news is the health tech industry in the UK is struggling. Money is there, but it's mainly being piled into the existing successful formats, paying for roll-ups and consolidation and scaling. The amount of money that's on at sort of seed level is really, really tough. I met a guy yesterday who'd done 200 pitches. Wow, that's real stamina. And secondly, the NHS is in a state of sort of catatonic resistance to change and innovation, and people finding it so difficult even to get their first landfall in the NHS, let alone trying to roll out across dozens of trusts. So I think this bit of news will be very, very welcome.
Yeah, like, you know quite a lot of health tech founders, don't you? But what are they sort of telling you? I mean, the NICE mandatory reimbursement sounds terribly boring, but it is actually transformative, and it's a really good piece of work from NICE. But if the ICBs, obviously, who are doing some of the strategic commissioning or all of the strategic commissioning in some
Yeah.
cases, if they can't afford to implement NICE approves, then what was the exam question in the first place?
Yes. So there's the buying the health tech. The really big problem that a lot of them find is it's not so much the cost of the health tech, because a lot of it's quite cheap. A sleep app is a tiny expense, even if you are rolling out to lots of patients. It's changing the procedures and the work patterns, in particular of the workforce, in order to accommodate whatever is necessary to implement the new pathway. That's where ICBs and primary care and hospitals, they just don't want to do it anymore. They don't want to. I don't want to change the way we're doing things. It's too complicated. There's friction every time we do change. I lose an employee because we've somehow just broken it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. I just don't want to change anything this year. And on one level, I have a lot of sympathy for that. It's just totally unrealistic. Steve, you and I are having to change everything in our lives as new technologies turn the world on its head. And if you're a lawyer or an accountant today, boy, oh boy, already this year you've seen your job completely transformed, sometimes in good ways, but quite often in quite worrying ways. That's coming at health. And I don't understand why they think the world stands still for health but spins for everyone else.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the esophageal cancer sponge. Yes, I do know it. In fact, it's produced by a company called Cyted Health.
Yes.
And they were mentioned a couple of times, or the sponge technology was mentioned a couple of times in the cancer plan that we talked about with Peter Johnson a couple of weeks ago. And I've actually visited them in their lab near Cambridge, run by a really impressive German chap called Marcel Gerung.
Yeah.
And we had him on the podcast, James. Episode 20.
It's amazing. Yeah. I'm share your enthusiasm.
Episode 27, if you're interested, in April 2024, with me and Helen Stokes-Lampard, who I started a podcast with. And
do you still hanker after Helen? Steve, seriously.
I do a hanker.
It's not the same doing it with me, is it?
Sounds a little stalky, if I may say. But seriously, no, the Health Select Committee, we visited Cyted in Cambridge, and me and Rachel Maskell went up there with one of the clerks. It was, in the last part, it was absolutely fascinating to meet Marcel. And, we'll repost the photo from that visit and the episode 27, if you want to have a look at it. And just mentioning on NICE, because obviously it's them that's done this transformation here. Sam Roberts, who's just left NICE to take a bit of a career break, absolutely brilliant person. We saw her speak just before she stepped down, actually. So I think she stepped down just for Christmas. We saw her in November, didn't we, at the HealthTech dinner in London, and she was talking about this there. And for people who are fans of Sam and fans of what's happening here with HealthTech and NICE, I'm actually hosting a roundtable for one of my clients in April, James, with Sam. So it'd be good to get her thoughts on this then, and we'll have a few places available. So if any of our listeners are interested in attending, get in touch with us via our email address or our WhatsApp. So it's preventionisthenewcurepodcast@gmail.com. or on the WhatsApp number that I gave out, and I'll give out again before the end of the show, and we can consider having you there. But yeah, it's a positive story, but as you say, with a warning that some of the health tech companies are still leaving the country. Anyway, let's take a quick break, James, and then we'll introduce our guest. This is the Health and Politics podcast. It's called Prevention is the New Cure. We are on episode 85 of this. We talk to the decision makers in health and care, and they're the people that listen to this show. Thanks for listening. Please hit subscribe. And just to give out that WhatsApp number that I alluded to there, 0333 404 6507. We're back in a moment with Sarah Woolnough from the King's Fund. Welcome back. Prevention is the new cure. We do health and politics. Our guest, as trailed right now, is Sarah Woolnough, very well-known figure in health and care, leading, as she does, the King's Fund. Previously, Sarah was Chief Executive at Asthma and Lung UK, spent more than 15 years at Cancer Research UK, which is where we meet, in senior policy and board roles. She caught our eye, James, did she not, last week, when she gave a pretty punchy interview to Justin Webb on Radio 4's Today programme, the nub of which was, can we keep spending ever more money on health and care and expect a different outcome? Welcome, Sarah. Nice to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you absolutely nailed it on the Today programme. There was a big cheer from Prevention is the New Cure studios when you gave this very, very wholehearted commitment to the prevention principle and trying to address the problem we have with catching cancer far too late, and also having an environment in our country that is really quite difficult not to be in a place where you're going to be at risk of cancer. But in reality, Sarah, how are we going to pivot? How are we going to have the resource shift? How are we going to change our workforce and the infrastructure of our healthcare system to actually make an impact on prevention? What are the hard choices that need to be made in order to do that?
Yeah, I suppose that's the question of the moment, isn't it? Can I say firstly why we wanted to do the work at the King's Fund? So this is the first of a series of publications looking at the sustainability of our health and care system, and we wanted to do the work partly because we so frequently get asked, "Oh, we're just spending ever more on our health service. What's it getting us? Can we afford it?" And actually, the first publication that I talked about last week really tries to give a balanced picture and does talk us through where we've been, where we are now, and where we're projected to be, which of course is a huge increase in spend on health unless we do something about it. To address your, and by the way, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because spending on health often does buy you good things, innovative cancer drugs being just one example. But this future unsustainability, because I don't think we can afford to spend 15% of our national wealth on health, pretty narrowly defined, and that's the OBR's definition of health spend, does mean we need to change course, and it does mean we need to get far more granular. I used that word last week about both measuring what we mean by prevention spend in order to then do something about it. And actually, I do think this goes back to not terribly glamorous, but really critical, stuff that I learned working in cancer as one example, whereby you have to have good data. That's the foundation for absolutely everything. You have to have clearly agreed definitions of what do we mean by prevention spend. Let's accurately record it, number one, and then you can start pulling the levers, which means you are shifting spend. It is happening in a few places, of course. There are good pockets of it. And GM, Greater Manchester, would be one example where arguably they're a little bit further on the journey of shifting the system left to spend more preventatively.
So, Sarah, measuring things is very important. You couldn't find a more sympathetic audience to that than former ministers. But obviously weighing the baby doesn't put on the pounds. What I'm trying to press you on, bluntly, is what are the hard choices that need to be made? We had a cancer plan that is addressing the problem we have in this country with outcomes and the unevenness of treatment in this country, but was almost completely silent on prevention. It had absolutely nothing in terms of upstream stuff on trying to improve the environment. Even within the health system, very little about secondary prevention, and this commitment of trying to get 75% of cancers caught in stage 1 and 2. It's a very good commitment, but I see absolutely no evidence of how they're actually going to do that. So what needs to happen in the money and the people and the buildings in order to catch disease earlier and to head off the huge numbers of people who are having to go through painful and expensive treatments at a late stage?
Yeah, well, maybe if I start with cancer, but then broaden it out. I mean, I was disappointed reading the plan, and I blogged about it. There wasn't more on prevention. I mean, I think you absolutely, and that's a choice, isn't it? Ultimately, that's a choice from the department. That's a choice from the centre. You could, and in my view, should have had more focus on prevention. But I do think it starts all the way back at public awareness. So, a third of cancers, or over a third of cancers, could be prevented. In my time working in cancer, did a lot of work around, okay, we need to raise awareness, we need to reduce fear, because there's huge fear still around. People often don't want to even think about cancer, quite understandably. So there is something about public awareness, but that doesn't happen by itself. You do need governments to make a choice to fund public awareness campaigns. You then need to send signals. Signals by themselves aren't enough, but you do need to signal we care about this. So the plan should absolutely have said more about what are we going to do at every point to intervene, to raise awareness, to encourage people to come forwards early. And then you've got to have all the system architecture and infrastructure behind that. I mean, it's so if you take early diagnosis, well, we have made progress, and credit to Sir Mike Richards and various others who over the last 15 years or so have really signalled we've got to make a change. We're much better at knowing what's happening in that early stage of the pathway. NICE guidance has changed in order to encourage more diagnostic testing. We've got quite granular about diagnostic kit, opening community diagnostic centres, shifting pathways, all of that stuff. So it's not terribly glamorous, but it's the building blocks to change. If you take that out and broaden it to the national level, 3 big shifts. What have we honestly heard that feels concrete about sickness to prevention? Barely anything. The tobacco and vape bill, wonderful piece of legislation. If and when it passes, we have to have, we have to. Yeah, of course, we have to have signalling from the top, robust strategy, architecture, and infrastructure to back it up.
It was happening anyway. The tobacco bill was happening anyway. I mean, the government have merely just picked it up and finished it off. And you praised the plan. And I saw your blog on the cancer plan. And you praised the 10-year, just going back to the 10-year plan, which will be a year old, believe it or not, in June, won't it? The 3 shifts. But I suppose the question we've sort of, can the NHS do prevention and treatment at the same time? We're currently failing so much on treatment. Does prevention not just always lose to the acute crisis, otherwise known as the day job? It's A&E waits where the retail offer that the government are failing on right now is A&E waits and access to general practice and access to dentistry. The prevention is just kind of like a nice to have one day, maybe, never.
But I do agree. I agree, and therefore it cannot really be the NHS's job, wholesale, which is why we have published the first in a series of papers about long-term trends and, who we want to be as a country when it comes to our health. This is much broader than the NHS. And you both know that very well. That's the point we're trying to make. I mean, that's the point the OBR has made, of course, which is, we'll be spending 1 in every 7 pounds of our national wealth on quite a narrow funnel, quite a narrow definition of healthcare spend unless we do something about it. So, partly our argument and our thesis is, well, good health, again, I'm preaching to the converted, good health is not made in hospitals. You've got to take a much broader view of both spend. And so that is, well, what are we spending on housing to contribute towards good health? What are we spending on education to contribute towards good health? What are we spending on the environment? And so on and so forth. And, you look at countries like New Zealand that have taken a different view about health and care budgeting. What the OBR and increasingly I think the Treasury understands is for the long-term prosperity and sustainability of our public services and long-term prosperity of our country, we've got to take a much broader view of health and therefore health spend. And so that does mean potentially characterising spend differently, counting differently, monitoring differently, and signalling from the top, which, is beginning to happen a little, in the sense that 2.5 million people out of the workforce on ill health grounds, 3 million in work with a health limiting condition. It's beginning to be above the waterline that we can't go on like this. So back to your question, James, what do we do about it? There isn't a silver bullet, but you do have to signal from the top, count what you spend, and begin to move that spend and probably set yourself targets.
So the signalling has been really clear for many years. The 10-year plan is no different than plans that Steve did when he was a minister that came across my desk when I was a minister. I mean, there's been absolutely no shortage of signalling for yonks, but it's just changing. I remember when the Cold War ended and the British Army got told it had to mothball all of the tanks it had in Germany, move back to Britain and reduce its headcount and focus instead on special forces. And they hated it. They loved their tanks. They loved driving around the German countryside and living in pretty German towns, and they hated coming back to Britain and having a different type of army. And the tanks sat there for 25 years in cold storage. That's what proper system change looks like. That's the scale of it. But there's nothing like that going on in health at the moment. No one is making any hard choices about changing the way in which we do things. So, Sarah, what would be 2 or 3 examples of things that a tough reforming Secretary of State and CEO of the NHS would do in order to actually make tangible changes?
Great question. I think just to first, there is a very important point about being willing to have the hard conversation or the hard narrative. And actually, our paper does also talk about that. So, one of the hypotheses for why health spend has increased so much over the past decades is, we've got an aging population and therefore more health need. That is only partly true because an aging population in itself doesn't add huge amounts of cost. We spend a huge amount in the last 6 months of life. And so one of the conversation, in order to lay the ground for the difficult, tangible, different changes, I think you do need to start to talk in a different way. And you need to say very clearly and PM down, ideally, we are not spending our money wisely to create a healthy, prosperous society. And therefore, we will have to make some difficult decisions. That means we will have to say no to some treatments that come along that, offer marginal gain. We will have to have.
Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, I think, I think NICE and other regulators should really think about, good health, longer term health and prosperity. And you could look at some of the decisions they make and say, they're moving in this direction, but it's glacial. You could say, we really want to buy good health for the long term. And we're going to have to make some difficult decisions about some of the marginal gain kind of Me Too treatments. That could be one hard decision you could make. I think you could and you should, because the 10-year plan does talk about this. Shifting the balance of spend will set yourself some really hard targets about how you're going to do that. I know ring fences have gone out of fashion, but I do think, you think about public health budgets in local authorities. Of course, they get raided with local authorities under such pressure. So I think you have a very hard ring fence, at least for a period, around some types of spend. And I think you signal in other ways. So, I know government's very shy around regulation and legislation, whether that will change on things like social media ban. I would like a government that is much more comfortable in saying this isn't about nanny state. This is about setting the conditions for health and healthy lives. So I think across moving money, asking your regulators to incentivize a different kind of activity from industry, you could make much faster progress.
The reason they don't like ring fences depends on the relationship between that DH and that Treasury. Now, we got a ring fence on the sugar tax. George Osborne wanted that to happen because he was Chancellor and he supported us, and we did it, and we put it into the school sport. Yeah, we put it into school sport premium. And what's more, we got Treasury to double it. We do health and politics here. The politics of this DH against this Treasury are interesting right now. And is this Chancellor feeling generous towards this Health Secretary? I pose this question. Just sort of coming to the end of our chat, Sarah, the sort of first bit that you were talking about, effectively it's realpolitik, right, from the King's Fund, because what you're saying is, what Wes is saying is that we don't want to end up with a health service with a country attached to it. Absolutely, and if we keep spending. But I just wonder also, in the conversations that you have within the trustee board there at the King's Fund, is this, how can I put it, is this anticipating that reform are rising in the polls, that they are being consistently ahead in 200 polls now, and you've got to look at trend. They control big upper tier authorities. There is a possibility they'll control Wales after the May election. And you have to say there is a possibility, although I think unlikely, but there is still a possibility that they will form the next government in Westminster. So are you pivoting, as the oldest health think tank around, to that reality of political life?
Well, we're motivated by something slightly different, which is, we have been around a long time, and we have the beauty of not having to react and respond in the moment. We can, take the longer term
Yeah.
view. What we want to do, and what I feel so passionately about, is we've got to answer the big questions of the day. That's how we have good impact and we're relevant. And that does mean, for us, responding perhaps a little less frequently to everything DHSC, every press release that's spurted out, of which there are rather a few. So we're trying to answer the big meaty questions. This has to be one of them. And we can. And then we're trying to be, as any good think tank should be, evidence-based, challenging, critical in our thinking. I feel hugely passionate about the amazing advances, if you take the longer term view, that, for example, medical innovation has driven, cancer being a fantastic case in point. So this rise in health spend, I often hear people, and people in my personal life say, oh, it's just endless money we're throwing at a health system. Well, no, over the longer term, we've seen tremendous progress, but we are now in danger of sort of diminishing returns in terms of our overall share of spend on a sickness service, on an acute service in the main. That's the argument we're making. We're trying to make it in a really informed way to all political parties. And I think, we are living in a time, as you very well know, huge political fragmentation. We want to make sure the debate is well informed by the best evidence. And it's a nuanced argument. As health spend is good. As countries get richer, they tend to spend more on their health. But, we can't ever spend more, particularly in a model that favours spending at the acute end.
Okay. Fascinating stuff, James. Yeah, you put it very well. Listen, well, good luck with the work. Keep us informed on what you're doing. We'll be very interested to talk more about it and the reviews that you're doing. And if you want to read the King's Fund response to the cancer plan or their ongoing work, then obviously kingsfund.org.uk, and you can find them on all the social media channels, as they say. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us.
You bet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Have a good half term.
There she goes, James, off to her half-term children's duties. I have to say, I'm recording in the kitchen, as you can probably see behind me, and my teenager wants his breakfast. Anyway, that was good, wasn't it? It's interesting. Was I fair to mention reform? Was that fair?
Oh, 100. Listen, the credit card is maxed out.
Yeah.
No more money, and people aren't getting a good service from the NHS. They're wondering why we're spending 200 billion quid on a health system that doesn't make us healthy. And people can smell that the way in which we're allocating the money makes no sense at all. They're seeing very, very expensive, not very effective hospitals, and are unable to get access to the GPs and treatments and diagnostics that they want. I mean, there's a real mounting anger towards the NHS, and we need to be aware of it. And I know that Sarah is a fellow traveller with us on prevention. She ran Lung and Asthma UK and was a huge champion for interventions on clean air, for instance. But you can see the struggle she has to call it out and to look the look the health leaders in the face and say, guys, we're going to really need to have to change the way in which we do things.
Yeah, I mean, just to close on this, and then we'll wrap up talking dogs. Steve's rant of the day. So the thing is that we could have talked about with her, and hopefully they will look at, is the way that, okay, I'm going to say it. The health service is just so producer-led. It's provider-led. It's what suits the provider, not what suits the customer. And, oh gosh, you can't call them customers. They're patients. No, they're customers because we pay a lot of 100%. Money, but we just happen to pay through our taxation system. Let me give you an example. I phoned my GP surgery early in the week because I wanted to make an appointment with my GP. They said, oh, you'll have to phone back. You have to phone back tomorrow morning because we can't now do appointments for the 7th of March, I think we're booking for. And I said, well, yeah, but I can't phone back tomorrow morning. I'm phoning you now. No, but you have to phone back tomorrow morning after 8:30 to get the 7th of March. And then the day after, you have to phone after 8:30 to get the 8th of March and so forth. It didn't suit me to phone back the next day. Now, you can say I'm being sort of petulant and first world about this, but the fact is nowhere else in my life, to go back to our conversation with Jim Mackey, is it all led by the provider. It's all what suits the provider. My kids had an appointment with their NHS dentist this week because it's half term. Well, yeah, that's when they can do it. The NHS dentist was on holiday this week, so they couldn't go to their appointment. Again, it's provider led. Anyway, that's my rant. That's
dentist
my
on
rant.
holiday in half term.
Yeah,
I have to go to. I had to give blood. I had to go all the way to hospital to give blood. Why on earth do I have to go to a hospital which is full of germs and disease in order to give blood? That's nuts.
Yeah. Listen, I saw you posted a picture with you and your dog, and I often used to talk on this podcast about Monty, my black Labrador, who is blotto on his bed, doesn't like to get up early, next to me as we record this. So here's the headline. Dog owners, James, have brain ages 15 years younger than non-owners. A Japanese study of 12,000 over 65 found that dog ownership cuts dementia risk by, wait for it, 40%. But the lead research was clear. It's not mystical canine brain healing. Dogs force habitual daily exercise and prevent social isolation, which are two big modifiable risk factors for dementia. So listen, what do you think? Are we doing the right thing with the dogs who I'm going to go and walk once I've done breakfast?
I'm super supportive of this. Listen, I don't want to see the wholesale nationalisation of dog owning and wild swimming.
That'll be next.
And every other lovely thing that there is in life. Please don't get me wrong. But listen, a lot of the pills that we give people for various diseases have nothing like this kind of impact on health outcomes. So just on pure efficacy, this is a remarkable insight. There is a causation question here. Is it the walking and the chatting to people when you walk that is causing the dementia risk, or the owning the dog? At one level, it doesn't really matter, because if the dog means you get out and walk, then attribute the benefit to the dog. It's scientifically fascinating to try to work out what causes what. But in practical policy terms, listen, this is a really good case for NHS prescribing puppies for sure.
There's our headline. As you just said, NHS prescribing puppies, Monty, who is 5, not a puppy, looked up. So there you go. Anyway, before we go, James, Steve's question of the week for James. Why am I behaving like a 3-year-old this week, James?
Oh, Steve, I didn't say happy birthday.
Why am I doing it?
Oh, my goodness, I should have baked you a cake. I'm sorry, man.
What's the answer?
Tell me all about is it the 300th or 3rd year of the show?
It is the 3rd anniversary. This Saturday it will be 3 years since we started the podcast, and we haven't done it every week. And look, we started it with Helen, who we mentioned earlier, not stalking. And it was really just to promote the work of the Health Select Committee, because Parliament doesn't promote itself at all very well. And that's why we started it. And, it sort of grew into something else. Sarah Woolnough took over for a bit. And now I have the dream team with yourself. And, our mission, as we say, is to talk prevention, talk health, talk politics, and have some fun at the same time. So it's 3 years this week that we started it, and now we're doing it weekly, and we're enjoying it, aren't we?
Well, I love it. I love doing this with you. I think we have an opportunity to hold the system to account a bit. I think holding Jim and Sarah's feet to the fire a little bit is a good thing to do. And I like being a champion for positive stories about how people are doing prevention well, whether that's new health tech funds or tummy sponges to detect cancer. I mean, these are the really important health interventions that need a platform to have and to champion. So I'm thrilled to be part of it.
Yeah, much, much more to come. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Please hit subscribe. It really helps us, and you can WhatsApp us, as we said.
Thanks, Steve.